The detective acknowledged the discomfort of the interview and offered a simple gesture of kindness, asking if she needed water. This was the precise moment when Arthur would give up on life. Just 5 hours later, an emergency 999 call would shatter the silence, revealing a story too heartbreaking for words, the story of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. The voice on that call was frantic, revealing a scene that would haunt those who heard it. An ambulance service reported that Arthur was struggling to breathe. The urgency was palpable. Was he breathing, Tom? Arthur's breaths were uneven, dark and heavy, a grim indication that something was dreadfully wrong. He had suffered a fall, the details of which were unnervingly sketchy. In the chaos, the truth lay buried. It was clear that Arthur had sustained injuries far beyond what a mere fall could cause. A large lump formed on his head, a silent testament to the violence he had endured. The circumstances surrounding his condition were shrouded in mystery. If Arthur could speak one last time, he would want to be remembered for his superpowers, especially that brilliant smile that could light up any room. But during the dark days of COVID-19, Arthur had been trapped with pure evil, facing a living nightmare day after day. The police in Midlands, England, were about to uncover a horrific secret, one they wished they could unsee. The emergency call came in on June 17, 2020, reporting that 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes had taken a tumble down the stairs. Paramedics rushed to the scene, only to find Arthur gasping for air. Despite their best efforts to revive him, the young boy's life slipped away, a tragedy that seemed like an unfortunate accident at first glance. But the doctors soon discovered something that would haunt them for years. The injuries Arthur sustained were catastrophic, inconsistent with the narrative they had been given. The damage to his brain was akin to that of a car crash, shocking even the most seasoned paramedics. The truth lay hidden within the chaotic audio of the 999 call, a recording that would change everything. When replayed, the frantic words and unsettling background noise painted a far darker picture than anyone could have imagined. What had once been perceived as desperation now echoed with chilling implications. Was there something abnormal in the background? The unsettling sounds hinted at a reality far removed from the initial account. Arthur's breathing was labored and erratic. He was barely hanging on, his condition dire. The voice on the line described how the child had thrown himself onto the floor, headbutting it in a frenzy. In a desperate attempt to help, the caller recounted how Arthur had been headbutting him as he tried to pick him up. The chaotic scene was painted further with descriptions of Arthur's labored attempts to breathe, a heart-wrenching sight. The caller, a woman, stated that she had soaked Arthur in water, hoping to revive him, but the sight of the lump on his head told a different story. The voice belonged to Emma Tustin, the 32-year-old stepmother of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Emma was the sole adult present during the alleged accident, her boyfriend, 29-year-old Thomas Hughes, absent at the time. She accompanied Arthur to the hospital, her role pivotal in the unfolding events. As Emma recounted the events leading to Arthur's injuries, something felt off to the doctors. Their instincts urged them to contact the police. Soon, detectives arrived to take Emma's first official statement. Emma's account was disjointed, claiming she had stepped out to fetch a basket of treats. In her version, Arthur had misbehaved, resulting in a series of chaotic events that left the child injured. The so-called thinking step, a punishment area devised by Thomas and Emma, was where Arthur was made to reflect on his actions. But as the story unraveled, it became clear that this was more than a mere accident. It was a harrowing tale of abuse and neglect. In a disturbing account, Emma Tustin described Arthur's troubling behavior, often leading him to be placed in a corner for his misdeeds. Yet, on the fateful evening of June 17, 2020, Arthur's actions escalated to a new level of aggression, leaving him on all fours on the floor, a troubling sight that foreshadowed the tragedy to come. Emma recounted how she had ordered him to get off the floor before shutting the door behind her. The sound of a sudden crack echoed in the room, a chilling reminder of the chaos that had unfolded in the last 6 months as Arthur displayed increasingly erratic behavior around other children. Despite her frustrations, Emma insisted she was doing her best for Arthur. She tried to lift him off the floor, but in a moment of distress, he banged his head against the hard surface multiple times, an act that made her intentions seem futile. In a heart-wrenching moment, she watched as he knocked himself unconscious. Desperate to revive him, she placed him on the sofa and poured a small amount of water into his mouth, hoping to bring him back to consciousness after he had struck his head repeatedly. The tension in the room escalated as she heard the sound of Arthur banging his head again. Emma rushed out, pleading with him to stop, but he defiantly refused. In an attempt to restrain him, she hugged him, lifting him in a struggle against his resistance. Yet, as she tried to lift him, Arthur fell again, striking his head brutally on the floor multiple times. In the midst of the chaos, he lashed out, hitting and kicking Emma as she desperately tried to control the situation. Emotion overcame her as she reflected on the unruly child who seemed to turn against her. Emma's narrative painted her as a victim of Arthur's aggression, a sentiment echoed by many stepmothers who often find their affections unreturned. Yet, her account remained closely aligned with the details she initially provided in the emergency call, even as discrepancies began to emerge. As investigators delved deeper, the truth awaiting them was so harrowing, it would forever haunt their memories. Arthur was placed on life support, but by 1:00 a.m. the following day, medical professionals faced the grim reality that nothing more could be done, leading to the heartbreaking decision to turn off the machines. The forensic examination that followed revealed a shocking reality. Arthur's small body bore over 130 separate injuries, each one speaking to the violence he had endured. From head to toe, every inch of his fragile frame was marred by bruises and cuts, testament to a life filled with torment. Medical experts discovered that his thymus gland and one of his kidneys had shrunken severely, clear indicators of prolonged physical abuse. However, the cause of death was identified as bleeding on the brain, a tragic culmination of the horrors he suffered. Additionally, the complete detachment of the retina in his right eye would later serve as a grim reminder of his suffering. Unbeknownst to the medical team at first, Arthur's body had been riddled with elevated sodium levels, a deadly sign of something far more sinister at play. 7 hours after his admission, his sodium levels remained dangerously high, indicating a troubling inability to process the excess salt he had ingested. Experts estimated that for Arthur to reach such toxic levels, he would have had to consume 6 tablespoons of salt in just one day, or possibly had been poisoned over several days. The autopsy report revealed a chilling narrative of torture, but this was not the most shocking aspect of the case. It was the horrifying revelation still to be uncovered during the ongoing investigation that would captivate the public and ignite outrage. Authorities were closing in on the sadistic perpetrator of these unspeakable acts as doubts grew about the tearful accounts provided by Emma and Thomas. Speculation gripped the nation, with whispers of foul play echoing through the community. What began as mere speculation soon morphed into unsettling truths. The challenge lay in unmasking the horror concealed behind closed doors. The Middleton police swiftly obtained a search warrant for Emma's 2-bedroom residence, where she cohabited with her boyfriend, Thomas Hughes, and their children from prior relationships. At first glance, the home appeared unremarkable, save for a CCTV camera strategically positioned in the living room. Emma and Thomas claimed it was intended to monitor Arthur, ensuring he did not harm himself. But as investigators would soon discover, appearances can be deceiving. In a seemingly ordinary household, Thomas Hughes and Emma Tustin navigated their lives with children from previous marriages. At first glance, nothing appeared out of the ordinary, save for a CCTV camera positioned in the living room. Emma and Thomas explained to investigators that the camera was intended to monitor young Arthur, ensuring he didn't harm himself. In a chilling revelation, investigators pored over the recordings, unaware they would uncover horrifying secrets that would haunt them. The CCTV footage laid bare the heartbreaking final hours of little Arthur Labinjo Hughes. The images captured would terrify anyone who laid eyes on them. "No one loves me. No one loves me," Arthur lamented, his voice echoing the deep loneliness he felt. "No one is going to be there for me." Just hours before his tragic accident, Arthur's desperate cries for help pierced through the recording. He called out for his Uncle Blake, pleading for someone to come and rescue him from his despair. Who were the figures Arthur was hoping for in his final moments? Blake, his uncle and the brother of Thomas Hughes, was someone Arthur longed for, while he appeared frail and weak, reaching out for the family he believed he could count on, beyond Emma and Thomas. As the detectives delved deeper into the hours of footage, they reached out to Arthur's grandparents and Uncle Blake. The family opened up, sharing memories of a boy who was born on January 4, 2014. Just a year prior, he was one of the happiest children imaginable. He idolized superheroes and was an avid supporter of Birmingham City Football Club. "Arthur, are you going to play for England?" A family member would tease. "No." "Why not?" Those who knew him recalled Arthur's joyous spirit, his laughter echoing in their hearts. He was cherished by everyone around him. His grandmother affectionately called him her baby bear, while others saw him as their sunshine. Arthur's infectious energy and bright personality brought joy to those who crossed his path. However, as his grandparents recounted the painful details, the truth began to unfold. It became painfully clear that while Arthur was loved, his luck had run dry. Born to Thomas and Olivia Labinjo Holcrow, whose relationship began amidst the haze of drug use, Arthur's early life was marked by turmoil. When the relationship crumbled, Arthur remained with Olivia. But the situation deteriorated further when Olivia entered a toxic relationship with Gary Cunningham, whom she met during an alcohol awareness course. The violence between Olivia and Gary escalated, culminating in a tragic event in February 2019, when Olivia, consumed by a drunken rage, fatally stabbed Gary 12 times. The most shocking aspect of this incident was that young Arthur witnessed the murder, a trauma that would haunt him. In 2020, Olivia was sentenced to 11 years in prison. As she served her time, Arthur found refuge with his father, Thomas, and his loving grandparents. This was the safest time Arthur had ever known, surrounded by the unwavering love of his grandparents and Uncle Blake. Yet, this period of happiness would soon shatter, beginning with a seemingly innocuous date. Thomas had met Emma Tustin online. As the investigation unfolded, detectives uncovered Emma's troubling past, marked by erratic and attention-seeking behaviors that raised red flags. Back in 2013, Emma had jumped from the top of a multi-story car park, driven by fear of abandonment when her boyfriend threatened to leave her. On another occasion, she hurled herself out of a bedroom window to prevent her partner from going out with friends. An ex-boyfriend described her as a black widow, claiming she drained the life from every man who entered her life. He noted her lack of maternal instinct, revealing that she sought children for the attention they provided as infants, only to neglect them once the novelty wore off. Social services frequently visited her home, alarmed by her neglectful mothering. Emma's entrance into Thomas's and, ultimately, Arthur's lives would unleash her darkest tendencies. Though Thomas was not the worst father, his relationship with Emma would soon lead to a devastating transformation that Arthur could never have anticipated. Yet beneath the surface, a sinister transformation was brewing. Emma's malice would soon manifest, leading to irrevocable changes in Arthur's life. Thomas, while never the epitome of fatherhood, had not been the worst parent either. However, as his relationship with Emma deepened, Arthur would face the unimaginable loss of his father in ways he could never foresee. Arthur Labinjo Hughes spent time with his father, Thomas Hughes, and his stepmother, Emma Tustin, on several outings. Yet, each time he returned, his grandparents noticed an unsettling change in him. The little boy grew increasingly reluctant to go back with them. One day, as Thomas arrived to pick him up, a police officer posed a haunting question: "Is she in the car?" Upon hearing this, Arthur broke into tears. The officer's reference to "she" was assumed to mean Emma. The warmth that once enveloped the family was rapidly diminishing, replaced by a chilling tension that Arthur could not fully comprehend. Arthur's grandparents began to realize that something was terribly wrong. The child was terrified of Emma, often hiding whenever she visited their home. Thomas's family, sensing deceit and disregard emanating from Emma, harbored deep mistrust. However, they could not have foreseen the extent of the darkness that was about to unfold during one of Emma's visits. While Arthur's grandmother attempted to buy him a Subway sandwich, Emma abruptly intervened, forbidding her from feeding him. She dismissed the gesture as an unnecessary indulgence. This moment was a chilling warning sign, illuminating just how assertive and controlling Emma was regarding decisions about Arthur's life. But it wasn't only Emma's behavior that raised alarms. Thomas began to show signs of a troubling transformation, losing his temper with increasing frequency. After one of Emma's visits, Thomas returned home with Arthur, and Blake, Thomas's brother, noticed the boy staring blankly at the wall, a sight all too unusual for a child. Blake, concerned, tried to lift Arthur's spirits with a snack. But Thomas quickly intervened, insisting Arthur was being punished and should not be fed. This incident marked the beginning of a nightmare that would only spiral downward. But it wasn't merely Emma's influence that was concerning. Thomas's demeanor had begun to shift. He was losing his temper with alarming frequency. After a visit to Emma, he returned home with Arthur and Blake. His brother noticed the young boy staring vacantly at the wall. This vacant gaze was an unsettling sight for any child. Blake, attempting to lighten the mood, offered Arthur a snack, only to be met with Thomas's harsh intervention. He asserted that Arthur was being punished and should not be fed. This was merely the foreboding beginning of a nightmare that would only become more harrowing. As the pandemic escalated, the Prime Minister announced a nationwide lockdown. He urged the British public with a simple yet grave instruction: you must stay at home. The aim was clear. It was essential to halt the disease's spread among households. Yet for Arthur, the true danger lurked within the confines of his own home. Isolated from his loving grandparents and under the oppressive influence of his father, Thomas, and stepmother, Emma, Arthur's well-being began a slow, tragic decline. During one particularly concerning lockdown occasion, Arthur's grandmother spotted a blue bruise on his shoulder. Immediately, she recognized these injuries as non-accidental. She noted 3 distinct finger marks on his right shoulder and observed bruising on his left, suggesting he had either been struck or pushed against something. In a harrowing revelation, the grandmother noted that the bruises on Arthur's small frame were unmistakably caused by an adult hand. 3 distinct finger marks marred his right shoulder, while the bruising on his left hinted at a more sinister origin, possibly from being struck or forcefully pushed against an object. But what truly troubled her was the sight of fresh bruises layered over older ones. She confided her concerns to Chris and Joe, fearing that this cycle of abuse had persisted for far longer than anyone could imagine. Yellow and purple bruises dotted his body, telling a silent story of suffering. The grandmother could only envision the agony Arthur must have endured. Despite her connection to Thomas, she acted swiftly, filing a complaint with social services the very next day. Upon Arthur's return to the home he shared with Emma and Thomas, a representative from social services contacted Emma for a visit. Yet, shockingly, no actions were taken. The officials claimed there were no visible bruises to warrant further investigation. They insisted that Arthur, alongside Emma's other children, appeared happy and healthy. However, the grandmother sensed that the pre-visit call had put Emma on high alert, prompting her to conceal any signs of the ongoing abuse. Blake made a desperate attempt to contact the Middleton police, but tragically, the officers failed to reach Arthur. They believed that social services were already addressing the case. This was not the first occasion the family sought help for Arthur. They had pleaded for assistance repeatedly, their cries echoing in the void of indifference. Yet, there was no resolution in sight. Something dreadful was unfolding in Arthur's life, an insidious evil that no one seemed capable of confronting. As the investigation into Arthur's death intensified, his grandparents and family began to direct their suspicions towards Emma and Thomas, their anxiety morphing into accusations. Yet, the reasons behind Arthur Labinjo Hughes's tragic demise remained a haunting mystery. This prompted authorities to delve deeper into the dark world of his caregivers. An investigation was set in motion against Thomas Hughes and Emma Tustin, unearthing a series of grotesque truths. As investigators seized their phones, they began to sift through the chilling contents, revealing audio recordings and text messages that would leave an indelible mark on the case. What they uncovered was nothing short of shocking. Each message illuminated the harrowing reality concealed behind the walls of their home. Emma and Thomas were not mere bystanders. They were active participants in the nightmare that enveloped young Arthur. Their exchanges laid bare the extent of their twisted alliance. The texts detailed Arthur's grim living conditions marked by hunger, isolation, and relentless physical abuse. Emma's messages revealed her bitter complaints about the boy, expressing her frustrations while chronicling her escalating acts of cruelty. Arthur was subjected to horrifying punishments, deprived of food and water, forced to stand for hours in the hallway as a cruel form of discipline. His desperate cries for sustenance and solace were met with derision. His need for comfort was dismissed as mere misbehavior in the exchanges between Emma and Thomas. This cruel correspondence served as a perverse validation for both Emma and Thomas. Emma would often capture Arthur's anguished pleas, sending audio clips to Thomas when he was away, seemingly seeking his approval for her merciless treatment. In response, Thomas's frustration with Arthur grew, urging her to adopt even harsher measures. He callously suggested that she should simply end him, proposing violent solutions to silence the child's cries. Disturbingly, the couple frequently exchanged messages just feet away from Arthur while he cried hoarsely, abandoned to his suffering in the hallway or left alone in his room. Emma expressed her irritation over Arthur's yearning for affection, dismissing it as him acting out or being spoiled. In their communications, they conspired to deny Arthur certain foods and devised punishments for his minor infractions. The abuse transcended neglect. Their messages were riddled with verbal degradation and name-calling, a testament to the deep-seated hatred they shared. The evidence from these messages painted a harrowing picture of a home steeped in intimidation and physical torment. Arthur endured repeated assaults, and one exchange revealed a troubling discord between Emma and Thomas. In a moment of vulnerability, Emma confessed that she could accept Thomas, but not Arthur. Thomas's sharp retort insisted that she would have to accept both him and Arthur, or neither at all. This exchange underscored the toxic dynamics of their relationship, with Emma's rejection of Arthur only serving to fuel Thomas's growing fury. In a revealing moment, Emma confessed her ability to accept Thomas, but not his son, Arthur. Thomas reacted sharply, insisting that she would have to embrace both him and Arthur, or neither at all. This exchange laid bare the disturbing dynamics of their relationship, as Emma's rejection of Arthur only served to heighten Thomas's frustration. The tension between them was palpable, a powder keg that could easily ignite into further mistreatment of Arthur. Numerous questions loomed, but one truth stood stark. Arthur was trapped in a wretched existence, frequently deprived of food. A particular piece of CCTV footage, once dismissed as trivial, suddenly gained sinister significance for the investigators. It showed Thomas and Emma lounging in comfort, savoring ice cream on one of the hottest days of the year. In stark contrast, Arthur was relegated to the stairs, sweltering and starving, denied even the most basic need for water. Clad in a thick onesie that only exacerbated his discomfort, he stood helpless as Thomas sat cross-legged, while Emma hunched over, indulging in McDonald's right before him. Arthur remained a pitiful figure in the hallway, prompting a chilling question. Were Emma's other children suffering in a similar manner? Arthur's grandparents disclosed to investigators that Emma's children often endured long hours without food, abandoned while their mother isolated herself in a room. However, the horror of Arthur's plight was uniquely extreme. The footage revealed no evidence that Emma's other children experienced the same degree of abuse. In a haunting twist, Emma's children later confided to investigators that they too faced punishment if they dared to assist Arthur, ensnared in a cycle of fear and complicity. The disturbing details of this case seemed never-ending, as another heart-wrenching clip awaited review. In these clips, Arthur Labinjo Hughes could be seen standing and shuffling his feet. At first glance, it appeared harmless. However, investigators soon uncovered the grim reality he had stood straight for up to 14 hours. As the harrowing details emerged, police intensified their scrutiny of Thomas Hughes and Emma Tustin, pressing them for answers about Arthur and the heartbreaking scenes captured in the tapes. Piece by piece, the accounts of Thomas and Emma began to unravel. It was Thomas who first cracked under the pressure, revealing a truth more nightmarish than they could have ever imagined. He confessed that he might have gone too far in punishing Arthur. In a chilling recounting, he described to the investigators how Arthur had exhibited behavioral issues, which he claimed caused suffering for Emma and their family. Though it was difficult to comprehend what crime a 6-year-old could commit to warrant such punishment, Thomas was prepared to explain. He revealed he had learned of torture methods used during interrogations, techniques that inflicted maximum pain without leaving visible scars or bruises. The question loomed large. What had really transpired on June 17, 2020? Arthur had been suffering for far too long. But did his small body simply give up? No, the truth was far more chilling. There lay an even more heinous reality behind the facade. While Thomas had gone to the supermarket with Emma's children, Arthur was left behind, as was all too familiar. Starved and frail, Arthur could not have done anything that Emma couldn't have managed on her own. Yet, she reached out to Thomas, claiming that Arthur was causing a problem. When Thomas told her to discipline him, Emma took matters into her own hands. By the time Thomas returned, Arthur lay unconscious, a victim of Emma's violent rage after she had smashed his head against the wall. After several failed attempts to rouse him, Emma made a fateful decision. She called 999, fabricating a story about how Arthur had beaten himself and then fallen. Thomas, with shocking nonchalance, insisted to investigators that it was Arthur's own fault. He claimed it was his inability to control Arthur that led to the incident, absurdly insisting that Emma should be set free. He declared that it was his fault for failing to manage Arthur, absolving Emma of any blame. This disturbing case reverberated throughout the nation, from Middleton to Parliament. The public demanded answers. Why had this rare case gone so horrifyingly wrong? What measures could be taken to prevent such tragedies in the future, especially when the evidence clearly indicated that Arthur's death and injuries were not self-inflicted? Eventually, the authorities saw through Emma and Thomas's tangled web of lies. Both were arrested and charged with the death of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. During Emma's trial on December 3, 2021, the judge delivered a damning assessment of the fatal assault. The final act of killing was done by you, Tustin. You shook him so that his head was hyperextended and flexed on his neck while simultaneously hitting it against the wall or the floor multiple times. The level of violence you used generated forces on his body. These forces were equivalent to those experienced in a high-speed road traffic collision. The injuries sustained were extensive and devastating. Emma was convicted of murder, receiving a life sentence with a minimum term of 29 years. Thomas Hughes, who was absent during the fatal assault, was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 21 years in prison. In December 2020, it was announced their sentences would be reviewed to determine if they were too lenient, potentially leading to longer terms for both. Emma had 4 children from previous relationships. However, by the time she met Thomas, only the 2 youngest remained in her care. Even then, Emma had been reported to social services multiple times for her alarming behavior. Concerns about the welfare of her children had emerged, yet Emma Tustin had mastered the art of manipulation. When social services came to investigate, she resorted to emotional theatrics, crying and portraying herself as the victim. Time and again, the authorities walked away, opting not to take any further action. Social services had been woven into the fabric of this tragic narrative, but their inaction became a shocking twist that few anticipated. It was as if they were paralyzed, unable to intervene despite the mounting evidence of distress. With no one else stepping in, it fell upon Arthur's grandmother to seek additional help. Why did merely reaching out to social services fail to instigate a multi-agency intervention? Shouldn't such alarming signs have ignited a prompt response? You have to go to a doctor, she urged. I can't fathom why this wouldn't trigger an intervention. Reports can be entered into the multi-agency sharing hub, and they should be reviewed. It's supposed to initiate a visit from a social worker, but there's a delay in recognizing the severity of the situation. While she wouldn't criticize anyone making a referral, she emphasized that if a child is suspected of being harmed, medical professionals can assist in expediting the process. How could social services have been involved so early in this tragic case, yet still overlook Arthur's prolonged suffering? What role did they play in sealing Arthur's fate? What actions do you believe should have been taken to rescue young Arthur from his merciless fate? The witness expressed their disdain, not wanting the best male in the neighborhood to resort to robbery. They had hoped to intervene, but Jordan's declaration of intent rang clear a robbery was indeed in the works, even if they hadn't labeled it outright. The air thickened with tension as the detective reiterated Jordan's explicit threat. If Colt had anything of value, they would take it. It was a clear indication of intent, if not a formal declaration of robbery. Curiosity lingered. Did they specifically instruct the witness to call Colt? Or was it a mere coincidence that Colt was the target? The witness admitted they reached out to Colt simply to hang out, although it was clear they were aware of the criminal dynamics at play. Alexandra insisted that she had tried to prevent the robbery, but her boyfriend, Jordan, dismissed her concerns. As Colt approached her house, he was ambushed by Jordan and his accomplices. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on Alexandra's mind as she considered her own fate. In a moment of realization, she faced the detective, acutely aware of the implications of her involvement. She understood the stakes, her voice trembling as she questioned what charges she might be facing. The detective's response was matter-of-fact. She could easily be charged as an accessory to the crime. The gravity of her situation struck her anew as she reflected on the weight of her actions. The detective reinforced the seriousness of her involvement, reiterating the potential charges she faced. It was a stark reminder of the consequences that loomed large over Alexandra. The detective explained the concept of discretion, his ability to choose how to proceed based on the circumstances. It was a glimmer of hope amid the chaos, but came with its own uncertainties. The detective elaborated on the process, emphasizing that while jail was a possibility, they could also leverage her testimony as a witness. However, without Jordan in custody, the investigation remained precarious. The detective pressed for details, demanding clarity on her involvement. As Alexandra weighed her options, a sense of desperation washed over her. She pleaded for reassurance, expressing her youth and naivety in the face of the law. In a moment of vulnerability, she revealed the burden of her choices, understanding that this mistake would haunt her for life. The detective listened, acknowledging her plight while remaining firm. The detective reminded her of her rights, reiterating that seeking an attorney was her prerogative. The stakes were high, and the weight of her choices loomed ominously. The conversation turned tense as the detective clarified the implications of requesting an attorney. If she chose that route, the dialogue would cease and the reality of jail would become imminent. As the interrogation intensified, a warning echoed through the room. "If you want an attorney, I'm done talking to you," the investigator stated firmly, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "Then you're going to jail. That'll be it." A tense pause lingered before he added, "Before we go any further, because you mentioned an attorney, I just want to clarify." In a tense moment, the detective posed a crucial question to Alexandra. He asked if she still wished to speak with him or if she preferred to have an attorney present. As uncertainty clouded her mind, she hesitated, unsure of what her best option might be, not wanting to be swayed either way. The detective maintained his straightforward approach, emphasizing that there were no games in this situation. He made it clear that she was in serious trouble and pressed her to decide if she wanted to tell the truth or continue the conversation. Finally, Alexandra confirmed her decision. She did not want an attorney present and was willing to engage in a verbal conversation. The detective took note of her choice, a significant turning point in the interrogation. With Alexandra's consent to proceed, the detective intensified the interrogation, aiming to extract an admission that she was aware of the plan to rob David Remnick. The air was thick with tension as he pressed on. She reluctantly confessed that she had a suspicion about their intentions. She had heard them talk about it frequently, though they rarely acted on those discussions. As she revealed her thoughts, she likened herself to a bird singing, yet the detective quickly countered that her words were anything but innocent. He urged her to acknowledge the truth, urging her to recognize the gravity of her situation. The detective sought clarity in her story, pressing her about the details surrounding David Remnick. She explained how Jordan had been relentless, pushing her for a ride, their intentions becoming increasingly clear. Her confusion was palpable as she voiced her bewilderment over Jordan's desperate need for money. She questioned why he wouldn't simply seek employment instead of resorting to robbery. In a moment of reflection, she pondered whether Jordan's actions were driven by addiction. Yet, she dismissed the notion, believing his motive stemmed from a reckless desire for thrill rather than necessity. The detective elaborated on the concept of felony murder, explaining that any agreement to commit a felony, such as robbery, that results in death, constitutes felony murder. The reality of the situation began to dawn on Alexandra. The detective made it clear she would soon be taken into custody. He reassured her that they were merely finalizing the paperwork before her impending arrest. Panic set in as Alexandra grappled with the implications of her situation. She expressed her distress, pleading for it all to be a nightmare from which she could awaken. As the reality of being incarcerated loomed, she voiced her fears about being placed in a cell with dangerous individuals. The thought of facing hardened criminals terrified her. In a desperate plea for reassurance, she questioned how she would manage without the ability to contact anyone before her incarceration. The uncertainty of her fate weighed heavily on her. The detective assured her that she would have the opportunity to make calls once she arrived at the facility. However, her lack of phone numbers left her feeling helpless. She shared that her primary means of communication was through Facebook, admitting she was unable to recall even her mother's phone number in this moment of crisis. Frustration surfaced as she realized she had no way to call anyone directly. The detective explained the process of collect calls, emphasizing the restrictions she would face while incarcerated. Fear gripped her heart as she envisioned sharing a space with individuals who were dangerous. She expressed her belief that her life would be at risk among such peers. The detective reassured her that there would always be correction officers present to ensure her safety, trying to quell her growing anxiety. He informed her that they were processing her booking and actively pursuing her co-defendants, who were still at large. The urgency of the situation heightened the overall tension in the room. Concern etched across Alexandra's face as the detective questioned her motivations for participating in such a dangerous plan. With remorse, she revealed that her only vice was marijuana, insisting it wasn't enough to drive her to such recklessness. In a chilling confession, Kara Swisher revealed her internal turmoil. She struggled to understand her actions, claiming they were unintentional. In her eyes, she had unwittingly become entangled with individuals who had far more to lose. Now, she found herself facing charges for a crime she never anticipated: murder. The weight of guilt pressed down on her as she lamented the loss of a life that did not deserve to end. Kara Swisher's voice trembled as she repeated her despair. She had become a scapegoat for decisions made by others who clearly cared little for the consequences. Someone is dead who doesn't deserve to be dead, she mourned, fully aware that she was about to enter a world of darkness and despair behind bars. With a sense of disbelief, she wished fervently that this ordeal was merely a nightmare. As she spoke of her helplessness, she accepted a cup of water, her hands shaking. "I hate this," she whispered. "There's nothing I can do to fix this." The investigator, trying to reassure her, acknowledged her cooperation. They emphasized that her willingness to assist would be taken into account. "It's not as if a penny charges something as serious as murder," they explained, hoping to instill a glimmer of hope in her troubled mind. But Kara Swisher felt trapped. There was no way to erase the stain on her record. "I'm always going to be labeled a murderer," she sighed, knowing that her path forward rested in the hands of a defense attorney, someone she would have to trust. She felt the walls closing in as she recounted her initial charge of being an accessory, which had now escalated to full-blown murder. The gravity of her situation weighed heavily on her mind. "I didn't kill anybody," she insisted, yet the charge of felony murder loomed ominously, linking her to a death she never intended to cause. "Felony murder means I entered into a felony that resulted in someone's death," she clarified, struggling to differentiate her actions from the horror that had unfolded. Yet the reality remained that it felt all the same murder. "How old are you?" the investigator asked, recognizing her youth. 21, she replied, her voice heavy with regret. "You've never been arrested, right?" "You've been cooperating," they reassured her, suggesting that her cooperation might lead to a more favorable outcome. Desperation crept into her words as she voiced her fears of imprisonment. "What's the point of even going to prison?" she cried, expressing the anguish of potentially losing everything. "I've made some poor choices," she admitted, her voice breaking under the weight of her reality. The investigator pressed on, urging her to understand the importance of the choices ahead. "You need to see what you're going to do with it," they stated firmly. "Now you need to make some good choices. This is your responsibility." "You made your own choices," they reminded her, urging her to reflect on the lives of those who had faced similar fates but emerged transformed. "Plenty of people go to prison, get out, and do good things," they added, emphasizing the power of choice even in dire circumstances. "Make good choices from here on out," the investigator urged, assuring her that a public defender would be available first thing in the morning, a lifeline in her storm of despair. "What are you going to do right now?" Kara Swisher inquired, her anxiety palpable. The investigator informed her that they were actively working to resolve the situation, but resources were stretched thin. "We'll be getting you out of here, okay?" they promised, trying to instill a sense of hope. As the investigator moved on to other matters, Kara Swisher's fate was already intertwined with the tragic story of David Remnick Maria Laborde. News reports revealed that Kara Swisher Schreffler was sentenced to 15 years in prison for her role in the murder of the 18-year-old, a verdict she would never have imagined facing. In an emotional courtroom scene, the mother of David Remnick Maria Laborde addressed Kara Swisher directly, her grief palpable as she spoke 3 years after losing her son. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, a reminder of the irreversible consequences of poor choices. Kara Swisher had faced the possibility of life in prison for her involvement in David Remnick's death, but today she received a sentence of 15 years of bittersweet resolution to a tragedy that would forever haunt both families. The investigation revealed that in July of 2023, David Remnick Maria Laborde had been lured to a home where he was brutally attacked and killed. Jordan Coleman, the mastermind behind the robbery, had directed Kara Swisher to find a victim, and she had suggested David Remnick as an easy target, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. As David Remnick Maria Laborde arrived at the scene, he was ambushed by 3 men. In the aftermath, deputies apprehended Jordan Coleman and Kara Swisher alongside Chris Hayes Johnson and Oziel McNabb. An arrest warrant revealed that Kara Swisher remained inside the home throughout the brutal attack. During the hearing, David Remnick's mother recounted her son's unwavering trust in Kara Swisher, believing she would never endanger his life. In a strategic move, Kara Swisher pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of armed robbery, offering her cooperation in the cases against her 3 co-defendants. The court sentenced her to 15 years behind bars. David Remnick's mother voiced the profound grief she faces, stating, "I will never be the same person." Though all 4 involved have received their sentences, she lamented that true justice for her son's tragic death remains elusive. In Clay County, Bridget Matter from CBS 47 Action News, Jax reported that the remaining 3 defendants in David Remnick Maria Laborde's murder have also been sentenced. Jordan Coleman received a 25-year sentence in Florida State Prison. Chris Hayes Johnson was handed a 30-year prison term, while Oziel McNabb will serve 26 years. Ultimately, a life was lost, and those responsible will spend the majority, if not all, of their lives behind bars. For the mere $20 found in David Remnick's pocket, what are your thoughts on this case? Should Kara Swisher have faced a harsher sentence? Please share your opinions in the comments below.